Hi there, I'm Antony C della Porta, and I'm an instructor and coach in delivering change through managing projects, which then lead up to programs underneath a portfolio or business area. Now, what I want to do in this session is, as you probably saw by the title, it's about PRINCE2. Now, this is not a training session. This is purely advisory and information video about projects and PRINCE2 and how we use PRINCE2 in a high-level view right through the whole life cycle of a PRINCE2 project. Now, what aspects you use of that obviously depends again on the tailoring you need for the project. But what we're intending to do here is just to give you an overview. So there's not going to be a lot of detail. The detail is contained in other videos that have specific areas, like the business case or the organization, or a specific process like controlling a stage and managing the product delivery. This is to give you a once through as a high-level view of the step-by-step process we take. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what the life cycle is helping us do. It's giving a guidance and a framework to help us step through so we don't get ahead of ourselves. We're not trying to run before we can even crawl and mind walk. So it's allowing you to do that for many reasons. Main reasons being to understand a lot more about the project as we go through from a build point of view, but primarily it's about governance. It's about allowing the people who own the project, in this case the project executive or at corporate level, to make decisions about going forward from here onwards. The three key words in PRINCE are desirable, viable and achievable. Do we still want it? Desirable. Viable, can we still build it? And of course, finally, achievable, will it still deliver what we expect it to do? And of course, what we expect it to do is deliver beneficial change. It's about the benefit. Right? So that's what we're going to look at, how we govern that through. So the first thing that we have in a project, of course, is what kicks it off from a PRINCE2 point of view is the project mandate. Right? Now, this is a form of a document, whatever it happens to be, that will come down from the corporate or program body. Corporate, right, stroke program. Now, because you may well be a project, part of a program, and therefore the trigger for your project in that particular tranche in a program is what will trigger that off. Okay, so this is the first thing that happens. We get a trigger from our friends at corporate level with the mandate, which then triggers off the first process within a PRINCE2, which is starting up a project. So let's put that up here. Starting up a project process. And the real point here of a project is to get some definition, some understanding of what the project is actually about and put some formality about it, because the mandate might be on a single sheet of paper, it might be quite a complex document. What we need to do now is unravel all that, put a high-level view of what the project's about so the business can understand that and the people who are going to build it for us, the suppliers, so we can all understand that and agree what it's about at high level. All right. Now, in this particular case, usually the first role that's on board is going to be the project executive. The project executive will be on board, usually will be appointed by corporate. Now, if it's coming out of the project executive's particular department, it's their budget, they may well have appointed themselves, said to the corporate, look, this is what we're going to do, we're going to kick this off right now, and therefore they'll have already appointed themselves to a certain extent. But the project will actually need the project executive straight away. And the sort of role description will be probably either something they've got or will come from corporate or maybe from the PMO about what they actually need to incorporate themselves. And to help the project executive, of course, we need the role of a project manager, a role of someone who's going to be doing most of the work, right? Because really at the end of the day, the PM is there to coordinate the environment for the delivery, not do the builds, shouldn't be really, sometimes they do, but to control the environment for the executive. Now, it's still not totally formal yet. The project's still in starting up mode, but we're trying to formalise most of the information. So usually the first thing the PM will need to do is just to put some form of document together to record things in a daily log, right? And it's usually a very good idea, I mean, to put this in here, if you've got lessons learned from other projects, is to have a lessons log, right? And that will be trapping, capturing issues and any other lessons from previous projects, programs, from their experience or other people's experience about the project that we're running here, right? Now, the next useful thing to look at is to understand what the project's about. So what we now need to look at is what the project is delivering. So the project product description, right? Description. What are we delivering here? That's usually a good idea. This is the high end of the scope. What is this whole project about? A new application document. And linked to that will be two important pieces of information. One will be the quality expectations of the overall solution, expectations, and linked to that will be the acceptance criteria for that acceptance criteria. Right? Very important. So we know what the solution is going to be from a quality point of view and how we're going to accept that. Now, from a business perspective, they need to know really what this whole project's about, because at the end of the day, this is going to be their governance documents. So we need the business case, right? And at this point, it's just an outline, right? And not going through all the details here, but the key elements of the business case are why are we doing this, the reasons, and what we expect to get out of it, right? I'm going to put major risks in here because they'll have a link. So we also need to make sure we've understood what the major risks are, right? Showstoppers, major risks, because they will eventually also be trapped in the lessons log initially, or the daily log, one of them anyway, so that you will transfer that later into the risk register when you formally kick the project off in the next stage, which is initiating the project. Well, almost the next stage and process, because before that we have to go to directing, which you will see in a minute. So the business case. At this point too, it's usually a good idea to get some idea of what the organizational structure might be. Organization, right? What sort of team do I need to have? And therefore linked to that, their roles and responsibilities. Roles and responsibilities linked to that particular part of it. So, what sort of team do I need for what sort of project am I going to be building? Do I need software developers? Do I need, hardware specialists? Do I need architects, designers, builders, graphic designers, whatever it happens to be, whatever the project's about? What sort of team do I need to have? Because what we're trying to do here, of course, is understand whether this project is going to be worthwhile and viable. Is it worthwhile spending the money on it? And viability. That's why we're doing this in this particular phase. Get a high-level view. Is it worthwhile for the business to run the project? And look at, can it be built? Right? Is it viable? The other thing we need to understand is the project approach. Now, curiously enough, Prince courses the program. This is how to develop the solution, how to build, deliver the solution, right? The objective, the project product. Because really, this is the development approach rather than the project. Anyway, Prince calls it the project approach, right? Now, all this is collectively put together, right? Especially the role descriptions here in the project brief. So this goes into a project brief. Because before we can proceed to the next process, the next part of the project, we need to have sign-off. This is the governance in place. That's why we're doing this in short form. This is governance. But also what we need to do is let them know, because this is usually quite short, a short time frame, a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. But the next one, the initiating, is going to be bigger, because now we've got to plan the project in a lot more detail, right? So we do the project brief. Because we're going to be doing a lot more work, we need to produce the initiation stage plan, right? The ISP, the stage plan for initiating a project. And all this will go up to the next process in place. I'll put a border around this so we know this is a particular process, right? And that this now kicks off the next process, which now runs throughout the rest of the project. And this is the directing a project process. So let's put that in. Let's call it directing a project. And this is key because this is where the direction and the decision making comes from. This is where the board will sit. In the PRINCE2 thing, we have the board with the project executive, senior supplier and senior user sat there who will then give direction and decision to the project from here onwards. But it only gets triggered at the end of starting up a project when we hand over the project brief and the initiation stage plan. So this is how we see the thing. Let's go on. Now, of course, the project executive is already on board here. But at this point, we may even have the senior supplier on board at this point. Because at this time, they need to sort of give an understanding whether that's going to work or not and have some input into that. Go to directing a project, and what we're going to do here is to request, initiate a project. We need that information here because we need their authority to go to that process. It's called a stage, actually, in this case. We see it's the first stage of a PRINCE2 project. Right. Quite a bit of work. And the point about initiating a project is now to establish how we're going to deliver the solution from here onwards. I'll look at more detail about how we're going to manage the project as well. So it's about breaking down the products, getting more information into the business case, and understanding how we're going to look at the project from there onwards. Right, so now we've completed starting up a project process. We've gone to directing a project process to talk to the board to now get their approval to proceed. So we've made the request to initiate a project, from here onwards. That will be based on the project brief, which we reduce from a high-level view of the project at this point and the initiation stage plan. Because now we've got a bit of work to do, which is what we're going to talk about next. Now, from a point of view of directing a project, their main activities are here for direction, decision, to approve things all the time, and ad hoc advice. Right, and we'll see that throughout the rest of this sequence as we go through. So I'm not going to look at that directly right now, completely directly. What I'm going to look at now is initiating a project process. So once we gone through there, we now move into initiating a project. Now, as this has got quite a lot of work involved in it, Prince sees this as stage one. So we're going to write in here stage one. Right, stage one. And we're going to go through a load of work. I'm just going to do it in high level to show exactly what's going on in here. And then we'll look at what triggers from there onwards and into the project itself. But once again, we'll go back to the board and ask for their approval. Okay. So there'll be usually communication has gone on between them. But as we go through this, obviously the members of the board should be involved throughout this part of the project as well. This is quite important, actually. People seem to think they sit back and don't do anything. Well, they're part of it. You know, when we talk about planning, part of the decision points come from the board to know about when to plan things. Okay, when we need to make decisions. This is what stages are about. So we'll look at that. Now, Prince's view is this is about solid foundations. Solid foundations. From startup, it's about viable and worthwhile. Right? Wow. So we're going to look at that solid initiating your project. So the first thing we need to put together here are some strategies. So let's have a look at strategies. How are we going to go about addressing certain areas? And those main areas are around risk. We need to know how we're going to manage risk, quality, right? Quality, whoops, I've got the T there. We need to look at configuration change and configuration. You know, how we handle issues. Remember, issues and risks, keep them separate, right? And also communications. Now, usually the communication strategy is the last one that's put together because it links with all the rest, because here we've got roles and responsibilities within risk, quality and configuration, who's responsible, and also therefore we need to know how to communicate them. Now the next major thing we need to do here, of course, is understand the product itself. So here we employ a technique called product-based planning. And this is not so much a PRINCE2, but it's a technique that PRINCE2 recommends to use. And that's something I usually make a big point of, because it helps us to understand what the product's about, what the linkages are within a project, helps us to understand a lot more about the scope. And therefore, we can also look at something else called prioritization, right? Now, there's something to use here as well. Prioritize your products in the sense of, what do I actually have to deliver for this solution to work as I see it at this point? But it also gives you an understanding about what's dependent, what's internal dependency, and what are external dependencies. And we look at that through another video on scope, etc., and product-based planning too. So I need to do the product-based planning, because what I actually need to do now is understand how I'm going to put the plan together. So I need to put the project plan. Right? I now need to build a project plan. I can't do that until I've understood where the products are and how the linkages are and what groups I need to do and when I need to build them. So I can't do that until I've done the product-based planning. Right? And that'll lead to me to project controls. Project controls, how I'm going to manage the project, right? From that point of view, from tolerances, for example, escalations, handling those sort of things. So these are the two areas. But managed by exception, which really is empowerment. It's the same thing, really. Project plan, project controls. Now I can also get a lot more information about the organization. So now I can actually firm up my team. So the organization and the team is confirmed. The organization and the team is put together. Okay, at this point. So we've got all these things. We can now get a much more detailed business case, because at the end of the day, the business is going to have to make a decision on that. So now we take the business case and get a detailed business case, all right? And as we produce the project control, the project plan and product-based planning, we now have a better understand on how we're going to deliver the solution, what Prince calls the project approach, right? So one interesting thing to note here, during starting up, we're making some definitions about different areas, like business options we may have in place, the approach on how we're going to deliver the solution. I'm going to do it in-house, is it off the shelf? I'm going to get some bespoke stuff done, right? And that's what you're ending up going to work out. What's the project approach I'm going to deliver all this? Okay. Now, another thing we need to look at, of course, is we're delivering stuff, we need to understand what the benefits are going to be. So linked to this will be the start of the benefits review plan. Right, linked to the business case, because obviously the business case is going to have what the benefits are about. Okay. At this point, we're now at a point where we start to put all this together, and most of these documents up here will be contained in something called the project initiation documentation. Now, be very careful. This is a bunch of documents. That's why it's called documentation. The PID, you know, be careful. It's not an animal in its own right. It is a collection of documents, like the old briefcase used to be, you know, on the top of it on your desktop in Office 98, if you go that far back, right? And so it's a collection of documents. How they're formed, how much of each of those documents you need is dependent on what you're actually putting together. We have the risk register connected to that, the quality register, you'll have your issues register from your configuration, etc. So all those are all documents you're going to have it. How much you need depends on what the project needs. Don't put them there just because you need to, or you think you have to, sorry. Don't put them there because you need to. Okay? Benefits review plan. Right? But that is not in the PID, because that's about project stuff. And of course, the benefits review plan carries on after the project's closed. That's not included in the PID. This group of documents are. And finally, underneath that, we need to put a plan the next stage. In this case, the first delivery stage, the next stage. And from our point of view, in this, it's going to be stage 2, right? We've got stage 1 here, so it's going to be stage 2. So we have a separate document for the BRP, a separate document for the next stage plan, because the business need to see that, and also the document. So they all need to agree. That's how we're going to run it from here on. Decide here, define over here, decide here what we're going to do, right? And put some pen and paper and get it down and get it signed off. Baseline it at this point, baseline your document, say this is an agreed state at this point in time. Right? I stress that because it's very important, because the very next day things may well have changed. So now we've got the benefits review plan, we've got our PID, the initiation documentation for all the plan, the strategies, the products based down, so we understand a lot more about the products themselves in more detail. And what we now need to do is plan the next stage. Now to do that, what that means is we've completed that stage. We're now at a stage boundary, right? So this is our first stage boundary. Remember, initiating a project process is also a stage. So now we have a stage boundary, and that is to mark the end of that particular process or that particular stage. In this case, the first one. And what we're going to do here now is wrap everything up, make sure everything's correct. We've got all the documentation in place to close the stage down and therefore go to the board with information to ask them to give authority to go to the next stage. But also what we need to do here, in this particular case, we're coming out of IP, initiating a project, is we do the planning in here. So we now do that planning, because that's the last thing we really need to do in that stage, is plan it. And then from there, we will go to the board with our documents, in this case, which is the BRP, the benefits review plan, the plan the next stage, and the project initiation documentation. Initiation documentation. The PID. The PID, right? PID. Remember, please remember, it's not a document, it's a collection of documents. And therefore we take those to the board, all those three, and therefore we request to deliver a project, because we need to go to ask them for authority to go to the next, at which point they will then authorize to deliver the project. They have to authorize their project. They've got to decide is, have we got enough information in the documents? Are we comfortable with the way we're looking to run the project, to our strategies, the business case, the approach we're going to take, the benefits expected, and the plan we're going to do. So look at what we've got so far and what we're going to do next. Right. They need to make that authority and sign it off, and that's what they're going to do here. And that's their main role throughout, and therefore keep corporate and program in touch with what's happening as well. So we'll look at that a bit later on. Go to them, request, and off we go. Hopefully get the green light, and then we'll go into delivering the project in earnest. And that's when we really kick the project off, and we're going to have a look at that in the next part of this session. Okay, so now what we've done is we've gone through starting up a project process to set a high-level view of the project, to see whether it's worth funding any further, to give a worthwhile or viability towards the project itself. Once we've established that with the project brief and planned for the initiation stage, when we've gone to the board to get authorization to proceed to initiate the project. So now we go to initiation stage. We put a lot more detail behind the project, initiating a project process, but it's also a stage now because there's a lot of work going on. We've gone through all that, put the plan, understood how we're going to handle certain aspects like risk and quality, etc. Finalize the details of the organization, controls, benefits review plan, and looked at the approach we're going to take, how we're going to build the solution from here onwards, right? Which they call project approach. And then finally, put in a plan for the next stage. And what we're really doing is the very first part of the delivery aspect of the project. And we do that in the stage boundary. The stage boundary marks the end of a stage. That's what they call a boundary, strange enough. And at that point, we update everything, and then we plan to go on to the next bit. That's what we're doing, really, that boundary. We've marked all the work during that work. And we're going to see that in more detail now, because we've gone to the board with that, say, okay, are you ready to authorize, deliver the project? At which point, we will hope that they will do just that. So we've come from initiating a project process, gone to the board, and we've made the request to deliver the project, and we're going to get just that, to authorize, deliver a project. Right. So that's what happens there. Now, once they've done that, we then move into the second stage. Now we're in the second stage. So a project in a PRINCE2 framework can have two stages. Right? One is usually the initiation, and the next one is the delivery bit. So you might have one delivery stage. So we're going to look at that right now. And we have two processes happening in this. The first one is controlling the stage. And this is where the project manager will sit and orchestrate everything from their deck chair, whatever it happens to be. They'll orchestrate the functionality and the project itself. Okay, so we're going to look at what goes on within controlling the stage, and the one underneath is the box for managing the product delivery. Now, the PRINCE2 concentrates on controlling the stage. The product delivery is something that's done elsewhere. Well, it's done within the project, but it's not really concerned. We're talking about managing projects here, so its original idea was kept up that level. Now we have PRINCE2 Agile. Now it's incorporating a sort of Scrum approach, an iterative development approach in Scrum, which is now looking at more detail on how we do that in the managing the product delivery process. So we have controlling a stage up here, controlling a stage. And then down here we have managing the product delivery. Managing prod delivery. And there's a link between them. The idea of this is that this has to be a link, because remember the PM site here and this product delivery down here. Now remember, I'm going through a high level view here, so it's just to give an idea what we're doing here. So the authorization has come from the board in directing a project process, because that's where the board operate. Remember, they're directing a project process. They operate there by getting requests in, authorizing that stages, feeding information up to the corporate area or the program if you're part of a program, providing ad hoc advice as well, and also handling exceptions. So when things are beyond the project manager's control, or authoritative control, let's put it that way, then you'll see how that works as well, and they're part of that decision making as well. So controlling a stage. Right, now when you go through this in the book, the first thing that happens is that what we're doing here is getting work done. So the first thing that's happening here is to assign work to be done. So what happens here is we have the first box here doing just that. And this is where the project manager now authorizes work packages. Authorize, right, work package. And that will be done in consultation with the team manager. Now, the team manager works down in the product delivery process. So in Prince, the project manager will work here, and alongside the team manager will authorize the work package. They'll put it together first of all, look exactly what they're supposed to be building here, because obviously you might have quite a few of these going on in a plan. I'll draw that up and you'll see what I'm meaning about. And they authorize that work package. So it's no surprise to the team manager when that work package comes in here and they accept that work package. I'm going to do that down here in a box. They accept the work package. Work package. Now it's very important to understand when they accept it. It means they've agreed what's in it, as you'll see, because when we get it back, the project manager receives it. But the project manager is only receiving it at this point in time, right? So there's no authoritative or no acceptance of the work package, because at the end of the day, it's not the PM's responsibility to do that. This is business who are responsible to do that. All the PM is doing is getting a package back from the work that's been convened by somebody. So what they'll do is they'll get the work package there, and they will then execute this work package. So they'll carry out the work they've got to do. Execute. Nice word. Execute work package. And then finally, they will then deliver the completed package. So deliver completed package. So accept the work, execute it, so do the work they've got to do, and then deliver it back. So that's what happens at the end of this particular process for this particular concept is it comes back up in here and the project manager now receives it. And like I said, there's a big importance on here because it's a case of just taking it back and not accepting what's in the work package formally from that particular point of view. This is the business responsibility. So receive work package. So this is really what goes on here. Authorize the work package, agree that with the team manager. Team manager takes it, goes to the group, wherever they happen to be, internal, external suppliers, doesn't matter. Execute that, build the package, deliver it back, and then the PM receives it. And then, hey presto, what happens next is whatever you decided to happen next. Do I bolt it with other stuff? Do I deploy it? Or do I wait till the end of the project, or program for that matter, usually the project, the end of a tranche in a program. Right. So bear in mind, how it would look in some cases is like this, for instance. If this is my particular stage where I'm functioning stage for the project, in this particular instance, I'm handling out work packages. I might handle one here. It will get done by the team and it will come back here. Then I'll handle another one out. For instance, along here, this might come back pretty quickly. Another one might go across here. So the colors represent possibly different suppliers, different work packages for different things. And I might have, a few going on like this, right, all the way through the project and all the way through that particular stage. So you've got work packages being authorized, received, work done on them, and then got back at various points throughout your particular stage. And at the end, obviously, you'll collect them depending what that stage is meant to do. If you collect them and going to deploy something, you'll bolt them all together, or you just put them in a cupboard and wait for somebody to come and look at them and sign them off later. But that's the principle of what goes on within the stage, initially. Now, other things happen within that stage. So, the first functionality that goes on here is for the PM to monitor and keep control on the stage, right? So, review stage status. Where are we at any one point in time with the stage itself, right? And that's done in various formats. The first one, of course, is to look at how the build's getting on. So during the managing product delivery, there will be a feed in here with the checkpoint reports. Whoops, checkpoint reports. So there will be something in the work package that the PM will have arranged with the team manager to provide checkpoint reports. And of course, the idea, of course, is sometime delayed just after that, they will be sending up highlight reports, right? Highlight reports to corporate program, whoever happens to work, to the board actually, first of all, beg your pardon. Highlight reports to the project board, sitting in directing a project. Right. So that's the general functionality that goes on here. Now, doesn't always quite work so easily, does it? Because one of the other points of sitting in that box in here, reviewing stage status, is to look and track things like risks and issues. There are going to be risks already associated with this particular stage because you know what you're building, and there are certain risks associated with that, right? So in here, what the project manager is doing in here, if we get a risk that materializes or an issue that suddenly appears on the board, we'll put in here an issue coming up, right? Then it will capture those risks or issues depending, right? Issues. So that's part of the stage here. And what will happen then, of course, is the PM needs to take corrective action. Take corrective action. Now, what does that mean at this point? Well, the first thing is, of course, the corrective action depends on what the situation is. And this is when we get down to the progress and looking at managing by exception, tolerances mainly. Right? It's about empowerment to the project manager, and it ripples down actually from corporate stroke program into directing, into the PM, and into the team leader. So it goes through these three main levels of management within the team. We've got directing level, managing level, and delivering levels. Right? So the board will have certain tolerance set on them from corporate stroke program about how much leeway they've got, right? And the same, the board will set tolerances on the project manager, say, well, you've got a certain amount of boundary to work within, before you need to report. Now, this is very important to understand. Tolerances are not there to say you've got a week's grace on top of the project or that stage or that work package. What it's saying is, if it looks like you're forecasting to go beyond our level of comfort that we leave you in control with, right? So I've got a stage here and you're saying to the PM it's a 6-week stage, but if you go beyond 7 weeks, or it looks like, and this is very important, forecasts to go beyond the 7 weeks, we need to step in. It's out of your control in some respects. That means the PM can't control it. What it means, we've out of the authority we're giving you for whatever reason, now we need to step in and provide some direction and decision for you instead, right? And this is what tolerances are about. This is about empowerment. It's the same thing, right? So we're giving you the authority to do that. If it goes beyond that, then we need to step in and provide some more detailed decision on it, right? And that's what they're about. Not you've got the extra week to play with. It's saying if you're going to go into that. And this is very important. I'm stressing it because this is where people get a little bit mixed up in it, right? It's about empowerment. So what will happen is an issue will come into place from wherever. It could be an issue to do with some specification build or a change of scope, you know, from the top, or the specification from underneath. It's an issue, and the PM now has to deal with it, right? And we look at all this, the configuration and the change management, issue management in another session. But what happens now is that the PM is now going to decide, is it within my remit to fix that up? Yes or no? If yes, then the PM can do something about it and then fix it up, but obviously document the first thing you're going to do, but fix it up. If not, then the PM has to decide, do I need some help? And at this point, they may well need to decide to actually escalate this particular, so I'm going to put this in red here, right? So escalate the risk or the issue, right? The risk issue, right? To corporate, because now the decision needs to be with them how they're going to fix it. So this is the corrective action to start with. Can I fix it? No, I need to escalate. Right? And I need to escalate this up and put an issue report and an escalation report to say I've got a problem here. Right? Now, if that means that whatever's going to go is going beyond the bounds of the particular stage at this point, then we have to go to the next level, which we'll look at in a minute. The first thing is, can we fix it up within the bounds we've got already? Right? If we can fix it up and don't go beyond the 6-week time frame, for instance, then we can carry on with the project and we can fix up the issue because we've now had a decision to do that. If it looks like we can't do that and we have to change the length of the stage, for example, or change the scope, for example, then we're in exception. So then we have to raise an exception report, right? And that means raise an exception report, because now we're in exception of the stage, and that's when it starts to get important, right? So now we're leaving the decision to the board to decide what to do next. So now if they say you've got to add an extra week to the stage, or you've got to replan the stage, then we're going to be at the next process, which we'll look in more detail in a moment, called a stage boundary, right? Because the stage boundary is marking the end of that particular stage. Now, in normal times, when I've completed all the work, like in here, I've done all the work, I've got to the end, that's where I am. I've done the work, now I've got to wrap everything up for that stage to say, where have we been, where are we right now, and where do we want to go to next? Because this is when the board are going to make a decision about how they see that, those 3 areas, the past, the present, and the future. Is it still desirable, viable, and achievable? Do we still want to go on, right? But so we'll get to that in a minute. If, of course, there is an exception, right, and they decide they need to plan, then technically we are at the stage boundary already, because now the stage is no longer viable. The stage plan is no longer viable. That's where we are. And what they then need to do is to produce an exception plan. So they'll ask for an exception plan, right, which the PM will need to produce, and then go back to the board and say, here's the exception plan. How do you like that? Is it going to work for us or not? In which case, if it's changing the length of the stage, adding on here, now we have a new stage plan. And that's the new plan. So it takes over the old stage. So the exception plan now becomes the new stage plan for that stage. Whether it's shortening it or not. It might be that you're here and you've got to chop it at that point. So your stage, of course, that's why you have a boundary, because technically your current stage plan is no longer viable. I'm at the boundary temporarily while the plan gets authorized. And if it's shortening or lengthening it, then it'll make lengthening it, I should say, then that's what the action will be. Okay, and then we would go back to carrying on. If we're stretching it, we'll go back. If we've finished the boundary, but if we've finished the stage, we stay at the boundary and then shut that stage down and update all the documents. All right. So make sure when you've got this section plan, depending on that is where you are next. And then they'll approve it and take that action from there onwards. Okay, so this is how an exception works. The issue's raised, track it through. If we need to raise an exception because it's going to take us out of the current boundaries for whatever reason, go to the board. They'll ask for a plan, which you may well have done already, but wait until they ask for one. Go back. Once it's signed off, that plan now becomes the new stage plan and put into action whatever that new plan means. All right. Now, winding all that back, as soon as we've gone through a normal stage and we've completed all the work at the stage, now we're at the boundary. Okay, now we've come to the end of the stage, we've done all the products we needed to do for the stage. So what we want to do now is get the board to make a decision about where we are at the moment. So the first thing, as we just said, is look at the past. So we need to update all the documents relevant to that part. So we have an end stage report. To start with, end stage report to help us understand where we are. So we update the plan, the project plan will get updated, right? Because now that comes from the stage plan. So that comes from the updated stage plan, right? Whether it's a section plan or not, it doesn't matter. It's now we've completed the stage. Can we update the stage plan as we go along through the stage? We don't update the project plan until we completed the stage because it's fed into it. You don't do both at the same time, really. Well, you shouldn't do, really. So we looked at the past, decide where we are right now, how we completed what we want, what do we like. Now we've got to look at the present. Right? So we make sure we've got all our configurations done, make sure all our configurations are up to date, configurations for all the products we've built. We need to make sure all the registers are up to date. What we've got here, and that the business case is still relevant. In that case, is there any change to the business case? Because now the business needs to make a decision about where we are on that point too. Where are we right now? Do we like what we've got right now? Right? Have we completed all the work we've done so far based on that? And then we need to look to the future. And of course, the main thing about the future is the next stage plan. Next. And they will use that to say, what are we doing next? Do we still want that doing? Do we like the money we've got to spend on it? Is it still viable, desirable, and achievable based on this information? And at that point, right, if they're agreeable to that, because this is what we're doing in the stage boundary, what we will then do is go to the board to request authorize the next stage. Authorize next stage. And that's when the board come in, right? Now, like I said, parts of this too, sometimes besides the highlight reports, there may be times when the PM might want to go up to the board and ask for ad hoc advice, but it's a two-way trip, ad hoc advice. So there might be one way or the other way. So the board might be asking for ad hoc advice from the project manager, just give us an update where we are with our products. We have things like product status accounts and product status reports that help us do that. But product status account actually just say, where are all our products at any one point in time that we're doing during this stage or up to this point in time in the project, if you like. Okay, we'll look at that more in detail as well, how that particular product gets used towards the end, especially when we go closing, which we'll have a look in a short while. So we get to the stage boundary, everything's shut down, we've handed all the products over, what are we going to do with them at that point, look at where we are, where we've been, and where we're about to go to next. And then go to the board with that information and say, okay, how do you like them apples? What do we do next? Do you wish to sign off now to go to the next stage? Are we still wanting the project? But do remember, when can the business make a decision? Anytime during the project. Anytime the board may come around and say, no longer wanted, can't afford it anymore, change the direction, close the project down anyway. And we'll look at how we handle premature closure in a short while. But that's the real core of the work, and we'll go from one stage to the next stage, however many you've done until we get to the penultimate stage where we're probably finishing down, and then we'll look at how we get into the final stage and close the project at that point. So there's a final stage with the closing project process, part of that final stage. No stage boundary at that point, because there's no boundary between one stage, because there is no other stage after that point. Okay, so that's the core of the work so far. Right, so now we've completed looking at controlling a stage and managing product delivery. Remember, very simple. Assign work to be done. Monitor the stage, handle risks as they come along and that you've planned for, and deal with any issues. Remember, we need to manage risks, respond to issues differently. Okay, have plans for risks, but we don't for issues. Escalate where we need to. If we can't handle it, it's not within our remit, manage by exception, tolerances and empowerment and all that. Get ad hoc advice or support from the board where necessary in directing a project. And keep tracking through stages one after the other. Every stage we need to have governance sign off that we want to go to the next stage. Really, this is where the directing a project comes. This is what the board are there for. Provide that direction and decision making, whether you go on to the next stage or not, and continue with the project. You'll still want it. So there's still got involvement all the way through the project, really. How much just depends on how much you agree and you believe they need. And this is really where the project manager steps in quite a bit. So they go to that and request the next stage. Now, when we get to the final stage, right, something is slightly different. First, like we said earlier, we don't have a stage boundary because we don't have a boundary between two stages. Now we have closing a project process. So let's have a look at that now. So closing a project process. This is to mark the end of the project. Remember, projects do have a finish. They're supposed to have a finish. How do we know otherwise? Right? Start and a finish. That's why they're temporary. It's one of the characteristics, remember. So we mark the end. Now it is in the stage itself. So I'll put a boundary down here to say this is the stage. So this will be stage 2 onwards. So we'll have stage 2 to the end. So here we have the final stage. And we go through the same delivery process, controlling, staging, managing product delivery, assuming that's what we've got in there. But in the end of the day, we've still got something to do, even if we're not building anything. We're maybe bolting everything together and doing final testing, final piloting or reviews of what we're doing here. It all depends on what you've decided that the project needs. Remember, this is the whole point. You need to tailor all these methods, PRINCE2 or whatever, to fit to what the project needs when it needs it through the project. Right? So you can be a mixed match of all sorts of techniques and approaches as you go through. So it doesn't really matter. Just making sure that you understand what the project will need to do it. Right? And don't be afraid to change things. If you need to change things, just make sure that anything changes, everybody understands that. But far more important, that somebody who has the authority signs that change off. Right? This is crucial. Somebody needs to authorize the change. Right? And that's what happens. Okay. There's a very famous film out called the Pentagon Wars. Started out making an army personnel carrier. Right? About 20 years later, they end up with a tank. And that's because there was no authorized change on what they were doing within the project or the program, depending on it. Very interesting program, actually. It's a real life project, actually, used for very well for training. So, final stage. And what happens when we approach the end of the final stage, we're now at a point where we're going to shut the stage down. So we're looking at normal closure. So the first thing we're going to do now is hand over the products. So we need to hand over products and get final authorization. So we hand over our products, right? Products, whatever it happens to be. And we get a final sign off that they're being closed. That will trigger. And once they've been accepted, right, by acceptance criteria, then we are ready to close the project down. Then we need to start updating all our documents. So at this point, we need to update all project documents, all project documents. All those in the PID, the project initiation documentation primarily, right? That's the first thing we need to do, is update all the documents, which we know. Business case. We do the stage plan, of course, for this particular stage plan. which will then update the full project plan, right? We need them updating because what the business need to do is to review all those to agree that they're ready to shut the project down as well. They believe everything's been fixed and being delivered. So we need to make sure our register up to date, registers, our configuration item records. So configuration item records, CIRs. We also need to make sure that the communications plan is up to date in particular. So we need to make sure our communication strategy is up to date, because now we're going to be using that to advise everybody that the project's strategy, beg your pardon, make sure the project now, they know that the project is now actually closed. Okay. And the other thing we need to do is to produce an end project report and advise the business that we've now closed. We're now ready to close. But the PM doesn't close the project. The board closed the project based on all that information. Okay. So we get to that point where that's what we're going to do. And then what the project manager needs to do is to draft up a project closure notification. In other words, really a document that the board are going to sign off, and the PM will end up doing probably the work actually, to send off to everybody, all stakeholders, that the project's closed. That's why you need the configuration management strategy completed at this point, because obviously that has all the numbers and contacts of anybody who's been involved that needs to know at this point in time, right? And then they'll go to requests. We ought to do it at the top actually. Requests from here, request, close the project. Close project. And there's one other thing they're going to be saying up here too, and this is the benefits review plan. So what they're going to also draft now is the benefits review plan. And this is why this particular document was never part of the project initiation documentation, because that PID, the project initiation documentation, is not going to be wrapped up and filed away when the project's closed, because it's only for the project, you know, in case of audit, people want to check everything, lessons learned and stuff, which we'll look at on there in a moment. So all that's part of the project, okay? So that all gets filed away. But the benefits review plan, of course, now is really going to take a hold. It may have some sort of realization through the project to make sure that it's delivering, or indicative of what it might deliver at the end of the project. But sometimes we don't always get that until we've actually completed it. But this is where things are changing. Right. You need to really do that as you go through the project if you can do. Deliver bits and see how it's going to work for you. This is usually a good idea. So at the end of each particular end of its stage at a boundary, if you've got some products and you can deploy them, this is usually a good idea to do, and we probably do that. Right. So the benefits review plan also goes up here. So I'm going to put the BRP, we're going to put the project initiation documentation that we've all closed off as well, and the draft notification for closure. Let's put that. The closure notification document that goes up there too, to show that now we've closed everything off. We need to send it off. So that'll be contact numbers and everything for the board to use to send off onto their stakeholders. So this is the standard thing. Closing, wrap all the documentation up, get the draft project closure notification written up, get the benefits review plan, tidy all the rest of the documentation up, including the end project report, and then go to the board and request close the project. In which case they'll authorize close the project. Hopefully they will then authorize close project. And they will then obviously at this point notify corporate and program that the project has now closed down. And then we signed off all the documentation and worked. Now, that's all well and good when things run normally. Like here, when things run normally within a stage, we can get to the stage boundary and shut it off. Now, sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes there comes an authority halfway through the project, we're closing the project down. Or at this particular point, It's gone beyond the bounds of comfort zones. Things have happened, issues have occurred, and we can't recover from those issues. Like here, it might be that the exception plan will be to shut the project down for whatever reason, right? At some point, there will be a request for a premature closure. So I'm going to put a big red line here and say premature closure. Now, close. So now we're automatically at closing a project. So I'm going to write some stuff up in red. This represents the different documents and approaches and activities we need to have from a premature closure point of view. Now, think about this. I'm halfway through a project. I've got things that have been built. Some stuff is still in the middle of being built, and some stuff I haven't even started yet. So one of the first things we need to do is advise that, but we need to document why we've got the problem. So we need to add an issue, right, to the register. So don't forget to do that. This is important. Add an issue why we're closing. This is an issue, obviously. Come out the blue, shutting the project. You need to add that in. Why are we doing this? Right. Then after that, we've got some products. So we need to produce a product status account. Right. Interestingly enough, all the other ones we do, all the reports we do out of our registers and stuff, they're all one-off reports. So you produce a report, it's one-off for a particular issue, a particular configuration, a particular risk, for example. Here it's a bit different. Here is an account of anything I've done so far. So you're producing a report on a lot more than more items, right? So the product status account, we're looking at all the different configuration about what I've got so far that I've completed, what I'm in the middle of building, and what I've got yet to do. Because there's some things you might have to complete or other actions. So that will lead to, you know, other recommended actions. So we need to have now recommended actions. Recommended actions from here. For example, if you've got something in the middle of being done, you've got to decide what I'm going to do with what I've got being done. Do I complete them or not? Stuff that's done already, what do I do with that? Do I store it for the possibility of use for a later date, or can I just scrap it, for example? For instance, if you're putting a building up and suddenly you run out of money to put the building up, you've got to do something with that building because it might just be a shell. So I've got to put tarpaulins over it. Hope it's not that big. You've got to seal it off from the weather. You've got to make sure the surfaces are cut off so there's no power and water going through it. You've got to make sure it's protected from and protecting the general public. So all these things have to take place when you've got a building that's suddenly halted in the middle of being built. We see these things quite often, actually. So this is what you run the PSA for, to find out where are we with stuff, and then follow on recommended further actions, what I need to do. Is there some stuff I can take and complete within operations? I can deliver what I've got so far. We can take the rest of operations and do that. Right? And then we go through the rest of the cycle, and then we go back up to the top, and we go through the rest of the cycle, update all the documents, the business case, you know, literally explain where we are and what's happened with the project. Do an end project report. We need to do that. But remember, do make sure you document it from an issue. And then we go through the rest of it to then go and authorize or get requests to authorize close the project from the board at this point. Right. So that premature will close from anywhere. So that will link down to all this stuff here to do these, but you still have to go back and complete the rest of the documentation anyway, close it all off. Right. So just bear that in mind. But don't forget the issue thing, because you want to make sure you understood why you did that. But this is how we close the project down. Right? Either normally we get to the end, delivered everything, or we've come to a premature closure, make sure we get everything updated and go up to the board. But at the end of the day, it's the board that authorised the closure. The board do that, and then they'll notify corporate and program that that particular project shut down. So this is PRINCE2 in a high-level view. We've gone to detail in some things because some of those things are useful to understand and give you some indication of the documentation you might need to use. And again, it's what you might need or what you've got running for you, right? So just bear that in mind, and hopefully that's giving you a good indication, a good understanding of the framework. Very straightforward, like all projects. You've got to start off at a high-level view of what it is and starting up, put the detail into the planning, what is relevant for the planning in initiating the project, get that signed off as well, and then run the plan and go through it. So it's doing everything in detail, a piece at a time, getting the level of detail a piece at a time to make sure we've got the governance in place to keep the fact that we're only going where we need to go and when they authorise us to go to the next part of the project and hopefully get to the end. Because at the end of the day, it's their project. It's the project executive's project. That role is accountable for the project success. Nobody else. That role is. Right? All we're doing, everybody else is doing, is managing the environment and keeping all the products going through to help provide the solution for the project executive who's leading, they're running it on behalf of the senior user who's at the end of the day going to use the product, right? Or their client's going to use the product, and keeping the track on the supplier who's building it for you. And that's what the whole system's about.